The sun had barely cracked the horizon, painting the jagged peaks of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border in hues of fire and shadow. But there was no time to admire the brutal beauty of the landscape. My boots crunched against the rocky terrain as I led Flint, my Belgian Malinois partner, through what felt like a valley of ghosts. The mission was clear: uncover a hidden cache of smuggled weapons, suspected to be funneling arms into the hands of insurgent groups. But nothing about this operation felt straightforward. The air was thick with tension, not just from the possibility of enemy combatants watching our every move, but from the sheer hostility of the environment itself. Jagged cliffs loomed over us like silent predators, while the biting cold of dawn gave way to an oppressive heat that made every step feel heavier than the last. Lieutenant Rivera's voice still echoed in my mind. Failure isn't an option, he'd said back at base, his tone grim enough to send shivers down even the most seasoned operator's spine. If those weapons reached the wrong hands, hundreds, maybe thousands could die. His words hung over us like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. And yet, here we were, marching into unknown territory where every rock and shadow could conceal death. Communication was spotty at best, and intel suggested minimal activity near the target compound, but something about this place didn't sit right with me. The valley seemed too quiet, too perfect for an ambush. It wasn't just paranoia talking. It was survival instinct screaming at me to stay sharp. Little did I know, the real danger wasn't hiding in plain sight. It was buried beneath our feet. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, Sergeant Logan Brooks moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his partner was the best in the business. Flint, his Belgian Malinois companion, walked beside him with an almost regal bearing, every muscle poised for action. To Brooks, Flint wasn't just another tool, he was family, a lifeline, and perhaps the only reason they were still alive after countless missions. Years of working together had forged an unspoken bond between them, one that transcended words or even standard training protocols. Flint's nose could detect threats invisible to human senses, and his instincts were so sharp that Brooks often joked he trusted the dog more than any piece of high-tech equipment issued by command. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. But not everyone shared Brooks' faith in Flint. Officer Jenkins, barely out of his teens and fresh from tactical training, watched the dog with thinly veiled skepticism. A dog's nose? Jenkins had muttered during their briefing back at base, loud enough for Brooks to overhear. What happens if it gets distracted by a squirrel or something? The comment stung, though Brooks didn't let it show. He'd seen rookies like Jenkins before, young, eager and full of misplaced bravado, but this particular job felt personal. Flint wasn't just a dog to Brooks. He was a hero in fur, capable of feats no human could replicate. Still, Jenkins' doubt lingered in the air, creating an undercurrent of tension within the team. Brooks couldn't blame Jenkins entirely after all. Flint's abilities bordered on supernatural. His ability to detect explosives buried deep beneath layers of earth defied logic, and his uncanny knack for sensing danger moments before it revealed itself seemed almost otherworldly. Even now, as they navigated the treacherous valley, Brooks noticed how Flint's ears twitched toward faint sounds none of them could hear, how his body tensed at subtle shifts in the environment. The dog wasn't just walking ahead. He was scouting, analyzing, and protecting them all without being asked. Yet Jenkins remained unconvinced, his hand resting nervously on his weapon, as though expecting Flint to fail at any moment. Little did Jenkins know, Flint's next move would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire mission. As the team pressed deeper into the valley, the air grew heavier with an unshakable tension. Flint's sudden change in behavior sent a jolt of alarm through Brooks. The dog's ears twitched erratically, his tail stiffened like a flagpole. and his muscles tensed as though poised to leap back at any second. "Something's wrong," Brooks muttered under his breath, raising his hand to signal the group to halt. Lieutenant Rivera frowned, but held his position, clearly torn between trusting Flint's instincts and sticking to the mission timeline. Jenkins, still skeptical, rolled his eyes audibly enough for Carter to shoot him a sharp glare. Brooks knelt beside Flint, studying the dog's every movement. Flint wasn't reacting to explosives or human presence. This was something else entirely. His nose worked overtime, sniffing the ground ahead with a focus that bordered on obsession. When Flint pawed at the soil near his front paws, Brooks felt a chill run down his spine. He motioned for Perez, their EOD specialist, to investigate. As Perez carefully brushed away the thin layer of dust, the metallic glint of a Soviet-era PMN-2 mine came into view. The discovery hit them like a sledgehammer. "Oh God," Jenkins whispered, his voice trembling. The realization dawned slowly and all at once. They were standing in the middle of an unmarked minefield, each step they'd taken potentially triggering death. Brooks's mind raced as he calculated how far they'd come since entering the valley floor 500 meters. Single file, blind to the danger beneath their feet. Every footfall had been a gamble, every breath a gift. Rivera's face turned ashen as he scanned the terrain around them. "If there's one," Brooks began, unable to finish the sentence. "There's never just one," Perez concluded grimly. The magnitude of their predicament settled over them like a suffocating blanket. These mines weren't scattered randomly, they were laid in patterns, clusters designed to maximize casualties. Jenkins visibly trembled, his earlier skepticism replaced by sheer terror. "We're dead," he murmured, clutching his weapon tightly. Brooks clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. They weren't dead yet, not while Flint was still leading them. But the knowledge that one misstep could obliterate them all made every heartbeat feel like a countdown to disaster. The weight of the situation pressed down on Lieutenant Rivera like a vice. His initial hesitation was palpable, his jaw tightening as he weighed the risks of trusting Flint's instincts against the ticking clock of their mission. Every second they delayed increased the likelihood of enemy reinforcements arriving, or worse, someone triggering another mine. "Brooks," Rivera finally said, his voice low but firm, "your canine has point. But we move fast and silent. No mistakes." The decision hung in the air like a fragile thread, binding their survival to the unyielding bond between Brooks and Flint. Brooks didn't waste a moment. Pulling out a small canister of bright orange surveyor spray paint, he knelt beside Flynn and whispered, "This is it, boy. Lead us out." The Belgian Malinois responded with an intensity that sent a shiver down even Carter's spine. Flint's nose worked overtime, sniffing methodically along the ground as if deciphering some invisible map only he could read. Each step forward felt like threading a needle through a labyrinth of death, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. As Flint identified safe spots, Brooks marked them carefully with precise footprints of orange paint, each mark glowing faintly in the dim light like beacons of hope amidst despair. The team followed single file, their boots landing exactly where the paint guided them, their eyes darting nervously at the terrain around them. Jenkins, still shaken from earlier, seemed frozen in place each time he lifted his foot, his face pale as if expecting the ground beneath him to explode at any moment. "One wrong step," Carter muttered under his breath, "and we're all gone." The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional rustle of wind. Any sound louder than a whisper felt like a betrayal, a flare signaling their position to unseen enemies lurking nearby. Rivera scanned the horizon constantly, his hand never straying far from his weapon. The valley walls loomed above them like silent judges, casting long shadows that made distinguishing safe zones nearly impossible. Flint's behavior grew increasingly agitated as he encountered areas laced with danger. At one point, he stopped abruptly, backing away from what appeared to be innocuous dirt. Brooks froze, his heart pounding as he studied the area. Without uttering a word, he signaled for Perez, who cautiously examined the spot. Sure enough, buried just beneath the surface was another Soviet-era mine, its metal casing glinting menacingly in the sunlight. "Good call, boy," Brooks murmured, scratching Flint behind the ears before marking the lethal patch with a bold X in red spray paint. It was a grim reminder of how close they were to annihilation. Despite the tension, Flint's precision was nothing short of miraculous. He zigzagged across the terrain, creating a narrow path that wound back toward the valley entrance. The route was tortuous, sometimes narrowing to barely the width of a man's shoulders, but it was their lifeline. Every step marked in orange represented not just safety but trust. Trust in Flint's instincts, trust in Brooks' judgment, and trust that fate wouldn't betray them now. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, its heat bearing down relentlessly, fatigue began to creep into their movements. The question wasn't whether they could follow Flint, it was whether they could endure long enough to escape the valley alive. The tension in the valley had been suffocating, but nothing could have prepared the team for what happened next. Jenkins, who had earlier dismissed Flint's abilities with skepticism, suddenly froze mid-step, his face draining of color as he realized the horrifying truth. Beneath his right boot lay a Soviet-era PMN-2 mine, its pressure plate depressed and armed, waiting for the slightest shift to unleash devastation. The metallic click echoed through the still air like a death knell, freezing everyone in place. Jenkins's breathing turned erratic, his chest heaving as panic overwhelmed him. "I don't want to die here," he whispered hoarsely, tears streaming down his face. His voice cracked under the weight of his terror, each word punctuated by sobs that seemed to reverberate through the valley. Brooks locked eyes with Jenkins, his expression calm but urgent. "Steady, Jenkins. Breathe slow, deep breaths." But the rookie's body betrayed him. His legs trembled violently, and his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. Every movement, no matter how slight, felt like it might trigger the mine. Lieutenant Rivera signaled for absolute silence, his own jaw clenched in grim determination. The team held their breaths, afraid even the sound of exhaling would push Jenkins over the edge. Flint, standing nearby, watched intently, his ears forward and muscles taut, as if sensing the razor-thin line between life and death hanging in the balance. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Jenkins's whispered pleas grew louder, bordering on hysteria. "Please, I can't die here. Not like this." His voice cracked again, breaking the fragile quiet. Carter shot him a sharp look, silently urging him to stay composed, but the damage was done. Jenkins's fear was palpable, infecting the group like a virus. Brooks stepped carefully to the side, his movements deliberate yet agonizingly slow, trying to position himself closer without making the situation worse. He knew one wrong move or one misplaced thought could turn this tense standoff into a catastrophe. As Jenkins continued to shake uncontrollably, the entire team braced themselves, knowing they were teetering on the brink of disaster. The tension in the valley had reached a breaking point, and all eyes were glued to Flint as he executed what might be the most critical maneuver of their lives. The Belgian Malinois, with his amber eyes gleaming like liquid fire, moved with a precision that defied belief. After carefully selecting a rock from a nearby pile, Flint returned to Jenkins, his powerful jaw gripping the stone firmly but gently. Brooks watched intently, his heart pounding like a war drum, while Perez monitored every millimeter of the operation, his EOD expertise guiding them through the razor-thin margin of error. "On my count," Perez whispered, his voice steady despite the storm of adrenaline coursing through him. Flint positioned himself directly in front of Jenkins' trapped boot, lowering his head with surgical accuracy. The stone was placed beside the pressure plate, its flat side perfectly aligned with the critical trigger point. Perfect, Paris breathed, astonishment creeping into his usually stoic demeanor. But this was only the beginning. As Jenkins began to shift his weight, Flint adjusted the pressure on the stone with incremental movements so precise they seemed almost mechanical. Each adjustment was a heartbeat closer to salvation or disaster. Time slowed to a crawl. Jenkins' foot slid backward millimeter by millimeter, while Flint's neck and jaw muscles worked in tandem to maintain the exact force needed to suppress the detonation mechanism. Every second felt like an eternity, the air thick with the collective fear of the team. Lieutenant Rivera clenched his fists, his knuckles white, while Carter muttered silent prayers under his breath. Flint's amber eyes remained locked on the task, his focus unshakable even as beads of sweat dripped from Brooks' brow onto the dusty ground. Finally, Jenkins' boot cleared the pressure plate entirely, leaving the stone in place. Flint held the stone steady, his muzzle applying microscopic adjustments until Paris confirmed, "Stone is stable." The relief that washed over the team was palpable, but it was short-lived. Their survival still hung by a thread, and Flint's next move would determine whether they lived to tell the tale. With Jenkins finally safe and the immediate crisis averted, Flint's instincts kicked into overdrive once again. The Belgian Malonga suddenly veered off their painstakingly marked path, his nose twitching furiously as he caught a faint but distinct scent trail. Brooks hesitated for only a moment before signaling the team to follow. "Flint knows something," he whispered urgently to Rivera. "We need to trust him." Though the lieutenant's face was etched with doubt, he nodded sharply. They couldn't afford to ignore the dog who had already saved them multiple times that day. The new route led them toward a narrow side valley, its entrance partially concealed by jagged rocks and dense scrub brush. As they moved cautiously, Flint began alerting to fresh disturbances in the soil patterns that suggested recent human activity. Perez knelt to examine the ground, his trained eyes identifying boot prints weighted down by heavy loads. "These aren't random tracks," he murmured grimly. "This is how the smugglers have been accessing the compound. They've been using this valley as a secret passage and deliberately reinforcing it with mines." The discovery sent a fresh wave of dread through the group. Not only were they navigating Soviet-era death traps, but Flint also started detecting newer, more sophisticated Chinese-made mines scattered along alternate routes. Each find added another layer of urgency to their escape. The oppressive heat bore down on them relentlessly, turning the valley into an oven. Sweat poured down their faces and soaked through their gear, sapping strength. Jenkins, still visibly shaken, stumbled twice, forcing Carter to steady him. "Keep moving," Rivera barked, though his voice betrayed his own exhaustion. Time became their enemy. Every step felt like a gamble, every second stretched into eternity. The smuggler's path offered hope, but it also revealed just how perilous their situation truly was. Flint remained their beacon of survival, zigzagging ahead with unwavering determination. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, even the resilient dog's movements slowed slightly, a silent testament to the toll the ordeal was taking on all of them. The moment they finally stepped beyond the minefield's perimeter, a collective exhale rippled through the team, as though the weight of death itself had lifted from their shoulders. The narrow escape left them shaken but alive, and Flint stood at the center of it all, his amber eyes still alert, his body poised for whatever came next. Jenkins collapsed to his knees, trembling not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief that surged through him. I can't believe we made it," he stammered, glancing back at the valley that had nearly claimed their lives. Brooks placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We made it because of Flint." He didn't just save you, he saved all of us. As they regrouped and began assessing the smuggler's compound, the true scale of the operation became clear. Hidden beneath camouflage nets were 27 crates of weapons, enough firepower to arm an entire insurgency. Worse still, the EOD team estimated over 300 mines scattered across the valley, some decades old, others newly placed by the smugglers to deter intruders. They weren't just hiding weapons, Pears muttered grimly. They were using the minefield as a moat, daring anyone to come close. Jenkins stared at Flint, his earlier skepticism replaced by awe. The dog that he once doubted had become his personal savior and the savior of the entire mission. 3 days later, as military engineers worked tirelessly to clear the minefield, Jenkins approached Brooks with a request that surprised no one. "I want to join the K-9 support unit," he said, his voice steady despite the lingering tremor in his hands. Brooks smiled faintly. "You've learned the hardest lesson there is: trust your dog. Even when you don't understand what they're telling you, they know more than we ever could." Jenkins nodded, his gaze fixed on Flint, who was sniffing the ground nearby. "He knew everything," Jenkins whispered. "When I thought it was over, he saw a way out. I'll never doubt a K-9 again." The story of Flint and his team became a testament to the extraordinary bond between humans and working dogs, a bond forged in danger, tested in chaos, and proven unbreakable. As the team finally reached the safety of the extraction point, the weight of what they had endured began to sink in. Flint, the Belgian Malinois who had been their guiding light through the minefield, sat quietly by Brooks' side, his amber eyes scanning the horizon as if still on guard. Jenkins, the rookie whose life had hung by a thread just hours earlier, approached Flint with trembling hands. Without warning, he dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the dog's sturdy frame, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," Jenkins whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "You saved me. You saved all of us." Flint tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but knowing, as if acknowledging the gratitude in his own silent way. The rest of the team watched the scene unfold, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. Carter wiped a tear from his eye, muttering, "Damn dog's smarter than most people I know." Even Lieutenant Rivera, who had initially doubted Flint's instincts, allowed himself a rare smile. "We wouldn't be standing here without him," he admitted, his voice tinged with both humility and admiration. The bond between human and animal had never felt more profound or vital. Flint wasn't just a tool. He was family, a partner who had risked everything to ensure their survival. The operation served as a stark reminder of how critical teamwork between humans and animals could be in the most dire situations. Flint's ability to detect danger invisible to even the most advanced technology had turned the tide when all seemed lost. As Brooks knelt beside Flint, scratching behind his ears, he caught Jenkins' gaze. "Remember this moment?" Brooks said firmly. "This is why we trust them. They see what we can't. They feel what we miss. And sometimes they're the only thing standing between us and disaster." The team nodded silently, their shared ordeal forging an unbreakable connection that would stay with them forever.